My daughter said I wasn't classy enough to walk her down the aisle, but what she doesn't know is that I built the resort she's getting married at. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. I never wore a suit unless someone died or got married, and even then, it felt like I was slipping into someone else's skin. My name's Ray Dalton. I'm 56 years old, built like a man who's worked with his hands his whole life because, well, I have. I started out laying brick with my old man at 14, built my own contracting company by 30, and poured more concrete than most people walk on in a lifetime. Raised my daughter, Olivia, on my own after her mom passed away when she was 6. She was my whole world. Every night after long days on job sites, I'd still find the energy to braid her hair, help her with school projects, and read her to sleep, even when my fingers were too sore to turn the pages. I swore she'd never want for anything, not like I did. I worked like hell to make sure of that. So when she called me last month, her voice clipped and rehearsed like she was giving a business presentation and told me I wasn't walking her down the aisle. I thought I'd misheard. I laughed, honestly, because it sounded so absurd. "What do you mean I'm not walking you?" I asked, still trying to keep my voice light, like maybe it was a joke gone wrong. But she didn't laugh. She sighed. That kind of long, pitying sigh she used to give when I'd mispronounce French wine names or show up to her college events in work boots. "Dad, it's just, this wedding, it's very high-end. Very curated. And I just think, it might be better if Tom's father walked me instead." Just like that. Not even a full breath before she replaced me with a man she's known for 2 years. I sat there on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, the spring digging into my thigh because I hadn't replaced the damn mattress in years, been too busy paying for hers and everything else she needed. My voice caught in my throat, and for a second, I felt like I was back at her mother's funeral, trying to figure out how the hell I was supposed to raise a little girl alone. But I didn't cry. I just said, "All right, Liv, if that's what you want." She didn't pick up on the hurt. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. She said thanks, like I'd just agreed to feed her cat while she was out of town. Told me she'd still like me to attend, if I was comfortable. Then she hung up. The worst part wasn't her rejection. It was how damn casual it was. Like I was some embarrassing relic from her past, best kept in the background where I wouldn't disturb the illusion she was crafting. I always knew Olivia was drawn to elegance. Even as a kid, she preferred tea sets over toy trucks, ballet slippers over sneakers. And I gave her everything I could to fuel that dream. Paid for private school, voice lessons, even a semester in Paris during college. She'd started to change then, somewhere between the cobblestone streets and the rich boy she dated for a summer. She came back correcting my grammar and wincing when I used the wrong fork at dinner. I figured it was just a phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was a slow goodbye. I replayed that phone call every night for a week. I couldn't sleep. Could barely eat. I'd walk into my workshop and stare at the framed picture on the wall. Me and Olivia on the day she graduated college. Her in a pale blue dress. Me in my only blazer, both of us beaming. Back then, I thought I was enough. I thought she was proud of me. Now, I realized she had been polishing the edges of her life. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped fitting the image she was curating. My sister, Janine, tried to make me feel better. "She's just stressed, Ray," she said. "Brides get weird before weddings." But it wasn't about stress. It was about shame. Olivia was ashamed of me. My calloused hands, my gruff voice, my plain suit, my truck with the dent in the side. The same truck I used to drive her to school every morning, singing off-key to whatever pop song she loved that month. The same hands that carried her up the stairs when she fell asleep in the car. None of that mattered anymore. Not in this new life she was building, where image was everything, and her father's presence was a liability. And yet, I still wanted to be there. Isn't that pathetic? After all the humiliation, I still couldn't stomach the thought of not seeing her in her wedding dress. I wanted to believe that maybe, deep down, she'd glance my way when she said her vows. Maybe she'd remember who helped her get there. Maybe she'd see past the tuxedos and champagne fountains and remember the man who raised her. But that hope was shrinking every day, dissolving under the weight of her silence. Then, a week later, I got the invitation in the mail. It was thick, heavy stock, gold foil, the kind of thing you'd expect from a royal ball. On the back, in fine print, was the name of the venue. I read it once. Then again, my chest tightened, a slow-burning disbelief rising in my gut. It was my resort, the one I designed from scratch 12 years ago, the one I poured every dime and drop of sweat into building. Back then, it was a swampy piece of coastal land nobody wanted. I saw something in it. Spent 3 years turning it into a luxury escape with ocean views and infinity pools. Then sold it off to a real estate group when the maintenance got too costly. But that foundation, those arches, that goddamn wine cellar everyone raves about, all mine. She didn't even know. I stared at the invitation for a long time. A cruel kind of irony settled over me. The very place she chose to prove how far she'd climbed was built by the man she no longer found worthy. And suddenly, the grief turned into something sharper. Not quite anger. Not yet. But something close. Because if she thought I'd sit quietly in the back while she paraded around pretending I didn't matter, then maybe she needed a reminder. And I had just the thing in mind. I didn't respond to the invitation. Not immediately. I kept it on the kitchen counter for days, right next to the bills and the half-empty sugar jar I never remembered to refill. Every morning, I'd walk past it with my coffee, glance down, and feel that tight pull in my chest again. It was embossed, heavy, elegant, everything Olivia had become. Every detail was designed to impress. The gold script, the double envelope, the custom wax seal with her and Tom's initials intertwined like vines. I traced my finger over the name of the venue again. The Atlantic Crest. That was the name I gave it back in the day, trying to make it sound more coastal than it really was. Just a bluff of land surrounded by sea grass and biting wind when I first bought it. But it had potential. I saw it before anyone else did, just like I'd seen hers. It was Olivia's favorite place growing up. She loved the wide windows in the dining hall, how they reflected the ocean like glass. She used to say it looked like magic. I remember one evening. She must have been 13. We stood on the unfinished terrace, looking out at the water. She told me, "Daddy, I want to get married here someday." Her voice had that sweet, breathy wonder kids have before life teaches them to be practical. I laughed and said, "Then I better make it perfect." I worked harder after that. Longer hours. More corners rounded, less cut. I wanted her to have that magic forever. I guess I never imagined she'd come back to it without me. A week after the invitation arrived, Janine stopped by. She let herself in, like she always did, balancing a grocery bag on one hip and a bottle of wine in the other. "You look like hell," she said, setting the bag down with a thud. "Have you eaten anything besides coffee this week?" I shrugged, not really in the mood to entertain. But she pushed, because Janine never backed down from uncomfortable silence. She made pasta, poured 2 glasses, and finally asked, "Are you going to the wedding or not?" I didn't answer right away, just stared at my plate, twirling the same forkful of noodles for 5 minutes. Then I said, "She doesn't want me there." "Not really." Janine snorted. "She invited you, didn't she?" I shook my head. After uninviting me from walking her down the aisle? That's not an invitation. That's a formality. "A charity seat in the back so I don't make a fuss." Janine sighed and leaned forward. "Ray, I'm not saying what she did isn't hurtful. Hell, if it were my daughter, I'd have canceled the whole damn thing. But you raised that girl. You built her life from nothing. Don't let her shame rewrite your story." She had a point. Janine always had a way of cutting through the fog. But I still didn't know what I wanted. Was it worth showing up to something where I wasn't wanted? Was it worth sitting there, a stranger at my own daughter's wedding, while another man walked her down the aisle like some polished, tuxedoed replacement? I pictured it in my head, over and over. Tom's father, some hedge fund type with veneers and $1,000 watch, placing her hand in Tom's like he'd earned that moment. Like he knew anything about who she really was. But then, there was the venue. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not out of vanity. Not even spite. Just this strange, poetic ache I couldn't shake. She had no idea she was standing on top of me. Every arch, every tile, every screw buried in the wood. My hands touched it all. My crew and I bled for that place, quite literally. I broke 2 ribs falling from scaffolding, trying to finish the east wing before the grand opening. I still have the scar across my left palm from when I caught a piece of broken glass the day before we laid the ballroom floor. That building is as close to a legacy as I'll ever have. And she picked it, without even knowing. That meant something, even if she didn't see it yet. The next day, I drove out to the Atlantic crest. It was late afternoon when I pulled up, the sun melting into the horizon like gold syrup. The place looked almost identical to how I left it. Cleaner, glossier, more polished, but still mine beneath the shine. I parked out back, where the staff entrance used to be, and walked around the side. The breeze off the ocean hit me like a memory. I closed my eyes and could hear the clang of hammers, the grind of drills, the laughter of my crew during lunch breaks. God, we were proud of what we built. I walked into the lobby like I belonged, because I did. And wouldn't you know it, the general manager was still the same guy who'd been a fresh-faced assistant back when I sold the place. His name was Caleb. He recognized me instantly, eyes going wide. Ray Dalton? Holy hell, man. They still talk about you around here. We shook hands. I told him why I came. Not everything. Just that my daughter was getting married here, and I wanted to take a look around. He didn't hesitate. Come on, he said. You want to see your ballroom? Your ballroom. We walked the halls. I saw the upgrades. The chandeliers they'd added. The new marble tiles in the front lobby. But the bones were the same. Mine. Caleb talked about how the venue had become a favorite for high-profile weddings, corporate retreats, even the occasional celebrity event. He said Olivia's wedding was one of the most elaborate bookings they'd had this year. She'd spared no expense. Her fiancé's family is footing the bill, from what I hear, he added. But she seems really invested in the details. Wants everything to be perfect. I bet she does. Before I left, Caleb asked me if I wanted to leave a note for the bride. We usually offer that to family who have a connection to the place, he said. I shook my head. Not yet. But an idea had begun to take root. Slow, steady, impossible to ignore. What if I didn't just show up? What if I reminded everyone, especially her, exactly who made this place possible? The first time I saw the land, it was nothing but thorns and swamp grass. That was back in 2010, when the market was still shaky and people were too scared to invest in coastal properties. But I'd always had an eye for what something could be, not just what it was. The agent called it unworkable, said the soil was bad, the wind too harsh. I walked the length of it in steel-toe boots, alone, imagining the beams, the glass, the curve of the deck overlooking the cliffs. I didn't see failure. I saw foundation. So I sold 2 trucks, pulled equity from my own damn house, and signed the papers without blinking. People thought I was crazy. But people always think you're crazy until you prove them wrong. The project nearly broke me. Not just physically. I expected that. But emotionally. 3 years of setbacks, storms, permits, and long nights where I sat in my truck staring at the unfinished shell, wondering if I'd gambled away my entire life. I lived on gas station coffee and microwave burritos. Slept on the site more nights than I care to admit, just to save time driving back and forth. I had a cot behind the storage shed. Olivia used to visit sometimes, wearing her school uniform and asking questions about the cranes and beams. I'd let her hold the blueprints, even though she didn't understand them. She liked feeling involved. I'm gonna get married here one day, she'd say, and I'd smile even when my back hurt so bad I couldn't stand straight. Some nights I'd look out at the coastline and think, this is for her. All of this is for her. Now she was walking through those same halls, turning her nose up at the man who built them. I wasn't naive. I'd seen the way she changed since college, the way her voice shifted when she talked to her friends, the way she'd gently correct my slang or roll her eyes at my rough jokes. I was no fool. I knew she was embarrassed sometimes. But I hoped, that maybe she'd come back around. Under all the polish, I still lived somewhere in her. I thought the resort would bring her back to me. Instead, it became the place she used to erase me completely. Caleb offered me the vendor list. Just in case you want to be involved, he said. You've more rights than anyone. I took it. I didn't know what I planned to do with it yet. Only that something in me refused to sit back and let this happen without reclaiming some part of it. I didn't want to ruin her day. That wasn't it. But I couldn't let her build her new life on top of the man she was pretending never existed. I started with the florist. Not to interfere, but just to look. I called under a different name and asked about arrangements, color schemes. Everything was high-end, curated to perfection. White orchids, pale roses, eucalyptus garlands. Cold, crisp, expensive. Nothing like Olivia's old favorites. When she was little, she loved wildflowers. Daisies, sunflowers, lavender. She'd run through fields near our old house, collecting them in her fists, always forgetting they wilted by evening. Now, she didn't want nature. She wanted symmetry, prestige, appearances. The baker was the same story. Multi-tiered cake with gold leafing, imported berries, monogrammed fondant initials. Over $4,000 for something people would eat in 15 minutes. I wasn't angry about the spending. Hell, if Tom's family wanted to burn money, let them. What stung was how far she'd gone to not be who she was. Every piece of this wedding felt like a costume, a high society stage play where I didn't belong. And then there was the seating chart. I got a look at it through a favor from Caleb. My name, buried in the third row, near the catering exit. Not with family, not even with friends. Just stuck in a corner like a hired hand. Janine was seated closer than me. So was Tom's college roommate. When I saw that chart, something in me finally snapped into focus. This wasn't just her being overwhelmed. This was her rewriting history. She wasn't ashamed of me because I wore jeans to brunch or didn't know which wine to order. She was ashamed of where she came from. And that I couldn't swallow. I spent the next 2 days in my workshop. Not to build anything, but to think. I needed to do something. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Olivia had built this version of herself on the illusion that she'd outgrown me. That her elegance came from nowhere, born from private schools and polished parties. But she didn't just grow in that world. She was carried into it. And I was the one who carried her. That night, I called Caleb again. I want to do something, I said. Something simple. Not to embarrass her, but to remind her. He paused. What are you thinking? I want to give a toast, I said. Just a short one. Not during the ceremony. Not even at the reception. Maybe at the rehearsal dinner. Just a few words. Not about me. About the place. About how it came to be. Caleb hesitated. You sure that's a good idea, Ray? No, I said. But it's the right one. He agreed to make it happen. Quietly. No fanfare. Just a moment. I didn't want to ruin anything. I just wanted the truth in the room. Olivia could pretend all she wanted. But when her new family toasted the venue's beauty, someone was going to say who made it possible. Not out of pride. Out of principle. And if that shattered the illusion she'd built, well, maybe it needed to be shattered. The morning of the wedding, I dressed slowly, button by button, layer by layer, like I was putting on armor. The suit was dark gray, tailored, nothing flashy. I had it made 5 years ago for Janine's second wedding and never wore it again. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, staring at a man I barely recognized. The lines around my eyes had deepened, my shoulders weren't as square, and my hands, God, my hands looked like tools, not limbs. Scarred, brown by sun, fingers crooked from years of work. Olivia had once clutched those same hands with both of hers when she was scared of the dark. Now she saw them as something that didn't fit the picture she was curating. But I wasn't there for her approval. I was there for the truth. The drive to the Atlantic crest was quiet. No music. Just the sound of the tires humming against the pavement and the ocean wind creeping in through the cracked window. When I pulled into the lot, it was already full. Mercedes, Teslas, black town cars with tinted windows. People dressed like magazine covers moved through the front doors with champagne flutes and polished smiles. I parked around the back, like I always used to, next to the old staff entrance. Some habits die harder than others. Caleb met me by the side hallway, clipboard in hand, headset slung over one ear. He gave me a nod, that look men give each other when they're about to walk into something neither of them fully understand. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. I looked at him. No, I said honestly. But I need to. He led me through a narrow service corridor, around the ballroom where the florists were still fussing over arrangements, and into a waiting lounge where some of the early guests were gathering before the ceremony. It was bright, too white, too staged. But I kept my shoulders back. I belonged here, whether she believed it or not. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing by the massive bay window with her back to me, veil pinned up, dressed sleek and modern, nothing like the frilly tulle gown she used to fawn over in bridal magazines when she was 13. She looked stunning. I'll give her that. Regal, like she'd stepped out of a society column. But there was a hollowness to her, even from behind. Like she'd built the structure but forgot to furnish the inside. Tom's father was next to her, adjusting his cufflinks, nodding at something she said. And then he turned, and his eyes met mine. There was a flicker of confusion, maybe even discomfort. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. I wasn't part of the story she'd told. When Olivia turned around and saw me standing there, her face froze. Just for a second. Then she smiled, a practiced, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice high and clipped. "You came. I built the place," I said quietly. It seemed wrong not to see how it was holding up. She blinked, just once, then turned her attention to something else. Her bouquet, her earrings, anything but me. "Well, thank you. I hope you enjoy the ceremony. Tom's dad is walking me, so they'll seat you with extended family. I think near the side. You don't mind, do you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. And she knew. In that silence, she knew. But she wouldn't ask. She wouldn't dare ask what I meant. Not today. Not when everything was teetering on the illusion she'd spun so carefully. The ceremony was everything she'd wanted. Or at least, everything she'd ordered. White chairs in perfect rows. A string quartet playing softly. Tom looked like he'd been printed from a finance magazine. Strong jaw, expensive haircut, empty eyes. When Olivia walked down the aisle, Tom's father at her side, I saw the guests smile, nod, some even tear up. But all I could see was how far we drifted. How the little girl who once danced barefoot on plywood floors had become a stranger in borrowed grace. The reception followed. Speeches began. That's when it happened. Caleb stepped up to the mic between the second course and the cake cutting. He tapped gently, cleared his throat, and said, "Before we move into the next toast, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special to this place." He paused. The man who built this venue from nothing, who designed it, funded it, and gave it its bones. Please join me in recognizing the original creator of the Atlantic crest, Mr. Ray Dalton. The room went still. You could hear forks pause midair. I stood slowly. Faces turned. Eyes searched. Olivia's face was drained of color. Tom looked confused. His father squinted at me like trying to place a name he'd forgotten. Caleb motioned gently, and I stepped forward. I didn't take the mic. I didn't need it. I just stood at the edge of the dance floor and let the silence carry the weight. "I just wanted to say congratulations," I said, voice calm, even, "to the bride and groom, and to my daughter." My eyes flicked to Olivia. "I built this place years ago, not knowing what it would become, just hoping it might be something beautiful, something lasting." Another pause. "It means something to see it full, alive, used for love." My voice thickened. "It also reminds me that foundations matter. You can change the surface, polish it, repaint it, but the foundation? That's what holds." No applause, just silence. Then a slow, stunned ripple of claps began at the far table. Someone stood. A few followed. I didn't look at Olivia again. I just walked back to my seat, heart steady, head high. When she found me later, her face was tight with fury and embarrassment. "Why would you do that?" she hissed. "You hijacked my wedding." "No," I said softly. "I reclaimed my part in it." She cornered me outside the ballroom, behind a column of marble and ivy where the guests couldn't see. The music was muffled, a bass line vibrating through the walls like a distant pulse. Her wedding dress shimmered under the sconces, delicate and pristine, but her expression was anything but. Her eyes, those same eyes that used to look up at me with innocence and awe, now narrowed with indignation, rage curling at the corners of her mouth. "What the hell was that?" she whispered sharply, the hiss of her voice cutting through the hum of celebration behind us. "Was that your idea of a fatherly gesture? You ambushed me. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I stood still, hands clasped in front of me like I had nowhere to hide. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let her see the storm under my ribs. "I didn't ambush you, Olivia. I told the truth. That place meant something to you once. I thought you deserved to know who made it possible. You just had to make it about you, she snapped. You couldn't just sit quietly and let me have one perfect day. I stared at her, really looked at her. The makeup, the earrings, the forced composure barely holding. You asked me not to walk you down the aisle because I wasn't classy enough, I said. You seated me like a distant cousin. You planned your entire wedding at the one place I built with my own hands, and never once mentioned me. And you think I made it about me? Her face flushed. Whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. I wanted everything to be perfect, she said, voice cracking just slightly. I didn't want people looking at you and wondering who that man was, why he looked so. She paused, bit her lip. Different. There it was. The word she'd danced around for months. Different. Not refined enough. Not elegant. Not polished. I was a stain on the silk napkins of her new life. And she couldn't scrub me out fast enough. I took a breath, my chest tightening like it always did when I tried not to shout. Liv, everything you are came from me. From what I built. From what I gave up. You don't have to love me for that. But I won't let you pretend I'm invisible. She looked away, jaw clenched. This isn't the time. No, I said, stepping back. But it's damn well past time, don't you think? She didn't respond. Just turned and walked back into the ballroom, her train dragging like a white flag behind her. I stayed outside a little longer, watching the ocean in the distance. The sound of clinking glasses and artificial laughter poured through the walls. Inside, they were toasting to love, to new beginnings, to the fantasy of a life built on clean lines and perfect speeches. But outside, I stood in the truth. Alone, yes, but upright. Janine found me later. She slipped out through the side door, holding a flute of champagne she didn't drink. Well, she said, that was something. I didn't answer. She leaned against the stone railing next to me, looking out. You okay? No, I said honestly. But I'm not sorry. She nodded slowly. You shouldn't be. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then she said, she's young. She thinks she has to prove something. But one day she'll realize what matters isn't the place, or the dress, or the guy with the fancy wine cellar. It's who shows up when everything else falls apart. Maybe, I said, but I won't be waiting in the wings for that realization. Not anymore. And I meant it. I had spent so long making excuses for her distance, rationalizing her growing discomfort with who I was. I told myself she'd come back, that this phase was temporary. But standing there, in the shadow of everything I had built, listening to her accuse me of ruining her day simply by existing too loudly, I realized something. She didn't just want space. She wanted a clean slate, one where I wasn't written in, and I couldn't give her that. Not even if I loved her. Maybe because I loved her. I walked back through the venue one last time, not to say goodbye, but to reclaim it. I ran my hand across the wooden beams I'd chosen, the banister I'd carved by hand. I remembered every nail, every late night, every moment of doubt I pushed through to make it real. The guests danced and laughed, blissfully unaware of what they stood on. That was fine. They didn't need to know. But she did. And now she did. By the time I left, the sky was bleeding into dusk. I didn't stay for the cake cutting. I didn't wait for a father-daughter dance that would never happen. I got into my truck, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. The tires crunched the gravel with a finality I could feel in my bones. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even later. What I felt wasn't grief, it was resolve. A closing door. A finished chapter. I had shown up. I had spoken. And now I was done. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was restless or torn, but because something in me had finally settled. I lay in bed with the window cracked open, the ocean wind curling through the curtains like a quiet visitor. The same breeze that once carried Olivia's laughter across scaffolding now drifted in through silence. But it didn't ache the way I thought it would. It didn't feel hollow. It felt clean, like the stillness that comes after a long storm. The kind you survive, not because you're strong, but because you have no choice but to endure. I'd spent years holding on to the hope that she'd come back, that at some point, Olivia would see me again, not as the embarrassment she tried to iron out of her life, but as the father who held it together when everything else threatened to fall apart. But weddings have a way of making truth visible. And the truth was this. She had made her choice. Not in anger, not in malice, but in ambition. She didn't hate me. She just didn't want me anymore. Not in her stories. Not in her spotlight. Not in the foundation of her identity. And finally, I didn't need her to. The next morning, I packed up a box of old photos and drove it to the storage unit on Lincoln Street. It was one of those climate-controlled places with keypads and humming fluorescent lights. I rented the smallest unit available and slid the box onto a single shelf. Inside were photos from her childhood, Olivia in pigtails riding on my shoulders, Olivia helping paint the porch, Olivia asleep on the couch with my flannel jacket draped over her. I didn't throw them away. I wasn't angry, but I didn't need them staring at me every time I opened a drawer either. I wasn't erasing her. I was just stepping back. Later that week, Janine called. Said Olivia had been asking about me. Not directly, she added quickly, but she's been quiet. You made an impact, Ray. Don't let her pride fool you. I didn't laugh. I didn't even sigh. I just said, she'll be fine. And I knew she would be. She'd move forward in that world of polished cutlery and designer shoes, hosting brunches with people who never had to repair their own fences. And I'd move in mine, a world of tools and timber and things that could be fixed with a steady hand. We were different now, not because life forced us to be, but because she'd drawn that line herself. And I'd finally stopped trying to erase it. A week after the wedding, a letter arrived. Not a text, not an email. A real, handwritten letter in clean cursive on ivory paper. It said, Dad, I don't know what to say. I didn't expect to feel what I felt when you stood up. I was angry, furious, even. But later, I rewatched the video. Yes, someone filmed it. And when I heard your words again, I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. You didn't ruin anything. You reminded me of something I forgot. Something I buried. I don't know how to fix that. I don't even know if I can. But thank you for showing up. Olivia, I read it once. Then again. And I didn't cry. Not out of stubbornness, but because it didn't break me. It didn't undo the boundary I'd finally learned to hold. The letter wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a crack in the wall she'd built. And maybe one day she'd widen that crack. Maybe she wouldn't. But either way, I wasn't standing on the other side waiting anymore. Instead, I started living. I took on a new project, a community center renovation a few towns over. Small job, good people. The kind of work that reminded me of why I'd started building in the first place. Not for prestige, not for recognition, but to create something that lasted. Something real. At the job site, one of the younger guys, maybe mid-20s, asked me if I had kids. I paused for a second, then nodded. Yeah, I said. One. A daughter. Cool, he said. You close? I smiled. Not bitterly. Just honestly. Not really. But I raised her right. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. And that was enough. Weeks passed. Then months. The resort sent me a Christmas card addressed to the original builder. Caleb added a note. Still telling your story to every bride who walks through these doors. I laughed at that. It was strange, being remembered for something they couldn't see, like a ghost in the drywall. But I liked it. I liked that my work spoke even when I didn't. Olivia never called, but she sent another letter on my birthday. Short. Simple. Just 2 sentences. Hope you're well. I'm learning things, slowly. It wasn't a bridge, but it wasn't a burn either. And that was enough for now. I used to think being a good father meant being present at every moment. Visible, vocal, involved. And maybe, for a time, it did. But being a man, a whole one, means knowing when your presence becomes permission for someone to keep hurting you. Olivia had the right to become whoever she wanted. But I had the right to stop shrinking just to make her version of classy more comfortable. She'll tell her story however she wants. Maybe she'll say I was difficult, or dramatic, or proud. But deep down, I hope she remembers what she stood on when she said, I do. Because it was me. And I'm not ashamed of that anymore. Have you ever felt like someone you loved tried to rewrite your role in their life? If this story struck a nerve, share your thoughts below. Whether you're the parent, the child, or the one caught in between, your voice matters. Let's talk about boundaries, respect, and the quiet strength of choosing your own worth, even when it costs you everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories. See you soon in the next one.